Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, sitting in for Riz Khan. Is it possible to eliminate all the nuclear weapons that are in the world today? The question of nuclear weapons will be high on the agenda at Wednesday's meeting between US President Barack Obama and his Russian counterpart, Dmitry Medvedev. Those two countries alone account for 96% of the world's nuclear stockpiles. A new initiative, Global Zero, is urging the two leaders to reduce dramatically their arsenals and later to eliminate all nuclear weapons within 25 years. So today we ask, can the world's nuclear arsenal be eliminated in our lifetime? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and then take part. And of course, we also welcome your phone calls on this show. My guest today is one of America's senior foreign policy thinkers and a leading member of the Global Zero Initiative. Chuck Hagel served as the Republican senator from Nebraska for 2 terms. He's now chairman of the Atlantic Council of the United States, which works on relations with the rest of the world. In his book, America, the Next Chapter, Tough Questions, Straight Answers, he provides a hard-hitting examination of the current state of America. Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's start first with the Global Zero Initiative, the campaign to eliminate nuclear weapons. I would imagine you would have to have a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience, a lot of energy, and frankly, a lot of faith to believe that the world will be able to get rid of nuclear weapons.
Well, I believe, as well as over 100 leaders in the world, that 100 represents the group that initially has started this effort, that we must eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. Because if we do not, there is only one course that can possibly come out of efforts by other nations besides the 9 now nuclear weapons nations to attain those weapons. And we know it's difficult. We know it will take some time, but what we think is important is that we change course. We change the frame of reference on this issue, especially for our young people, the next generation. We are not under any illusions that this is going to be quick or easy. Strong, verifiable regimens must be put in place. All the dynamics that must happen. But many of us believe it's worth it, and we owe it to the next few generations of the world.
Well, let me ask you about how one verifies that countries are getting rid of their nuclear weapons. How does one police an order like this?
Well, we are going to, over the next few months, this group, and we have some of the best minds in the world on this, come up with a protocol, a program that we will then present to the leaders of the world early next year. And one of the leaders, for example, in this effort is Ambassador Richard Burt, who is the chief START negotiator of the United States government. These are people who are experienced, they're very realistic, they're hard-headed, they're clear-eyed, they understand all of this, and we will work into this verifiable protocol. That is a huge part of this. Now, you ask, how can that happen? Let's go back and take a look at some of the programs that have worked pretty well on START and SALT, Nunn, Lugar. These were all programs that had some verifiability element, and they were all very important to these programs. You remember what President Reagan said, trust but verify. Verifiability obviously is a centerpiece for whatever we can do, but we also have to change the mindset. We have to change the frame of reference here.
Well, that that of course is on the understanding that countries will enter into this agreement and that they will verify, they will allow verification, etc. What about rogue states?
Well, that's part of what we're going to be dealing with here, but it must begin with, as you said in the lead-in to this program, the 2 nuclear powers that now are responsible for 96% of the nuclear weapons in the world. Russia and the United States have a particular obligation. We must join in some unison here to lead the rest of the world. Yes, the consensus of these other 7 nations that now possess nuclear weapons have to blend and work into that as well. The rogue nations issue, that's one of the most important reasons why we need to get rid of nuclear weapons, why we need to set a new course for the world so that we don't have this great inventory of available nuclear weapons for rogue states to purchase or use or steal. as well as terrorist groups. So all of these things fold into the larger universe of the effort.
You talked about Russia and the United States having 96% of this arsenal. You met with the Russian leader, Dmitry Medvedev, earlier this month. What is the impression you got from him on the reduction of weapons?
We had a very long meeting with President Medvedev, as well as his foreign minister, and we met with his national security advisor, his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, other senior leaders of the Russian government. All are very supportive of this effort. You know what President Medvedev has said about nuclear weapons. We should eliminate them. You know what President Obama has said about nuclear weapons. Of course, saying something and believing in something is a long way from actually accomplishing that effort. But it must begin there, though. It must begin with a commitment from the leaders of those two countries, the United States and Russia. And from that commitment, then we can build out into the next generations. And I believe President Medvedev as well as President Obama are serious about this.
Well, let's go to one of our viewers who's calling in from London. This is Marley from London. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, sir. Good evening. It's a very good proposition. But first of all, I believe, very strongly, I believe, the current leadership around the world, there is a moral failure going on. Unless they have a moral capacity to talk and do what they talk. For example, if you look at Palestine, there is no war, there is a war crime and they are not dealing with it. But in Sudan, they are dealing with it, and they are really biased justice. And if you look at Sri Lanka, the Tamils being killed, there is a genocidal war going on in Sri Lanka, nothing being done. So there is a total moral
Marley,
failure.
what is your question with regards to the issue we're talking about, the reduction of nuclear weapons?
My question is that leaders, there is a total moral failure. Unless we bring these leaders to a moral standard, nothing can be done. That's my question. What do you think about it?
Okay, thank you. Let me put that to the Senator.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I said in my opening statement that that leadership is critical, because we know in life nothing is ever accomplished without leadership. I think it's interesting that the two leaders that we're talking about specifically of Russia and the United States, Mr. Obama and Mr. Medvedev, are both in their 40s. And it represents a new generation of thinking. Now, again, that's a long leap between that thinking and commitment to getting it done. And again, we're well aware of the difficulties, but we must start somewhere. And that kind of, as the caller says, that kind of moral leadership is absolutely critical. Now, the reality is we are going to continue to have, unfortunately, conflict in the world, but we can't, as leaders of the world, stand back and just say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We owe the next generation of mankind far more than that. And I do believe that if we can commit ourselves, and enough leaders will join this effort, and I believe in, for example, the G20 here that is meeting as they discuss this issue and other issues, I don't know of one of those leaders that would not commit to some, at least, moral obligation or responsibility to try to rid the earth of nuclear weapons.
We've got an email from Wendy Day. She writes to us from Georgia here in the United States, and she writes, can the rest of the world be persuaded to give up their arsenal when the image of the United States is that of the world's bully? Don't we indeed need to change the perception and the reality before asking folks to lay down their arms, nuclear or otherwise?
Mm-hmm. Well, her observation is a good one, and it's relevant. Yes, to her question. And again, I think that's all part of leadership. That's why this must begin with the United States and Russia. Look, for example, what President Obama has done in the first 2 months he's been in office. His Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton, has met with the Russian foreign minister. She's been in 5 regions of the world. The President of the United States is out of the United States now, will be in different parts of the world over the next week. I think that is the beginning of not just symbolism of reaching out, but in fact engaging, in listening, finding common ground to build common interests based on consensus. And we're going to have differences. We will always have differences, but we should define our relationships based not on those differences, but on our common interests.
Well, I mean, that brings us to the new administration that is here in Washington. I think that perception of the United States being a bully in the world has come largely from what the previous administration has done.
Oh, I think that's right, and we are now in our unfortunately 7th and 8th year in 2 long wars. That's not all America's fault, of course not. But I think this last administration misplayed a lot of the great goodwill that redounded to this country and the American people after the terrorist attacks on our country on September 11, 2001. The fact is the past is the past. We now move forward. Let's try to get to high ground and fix some of these great problems and challenges for mankind. Working together, I believe we can do that.
You know, when one looks at why nuclear weapons have been around in the first place, there are those who would say that nuclear weapons have kept the peace since World War II. You know, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction has kept the peace between the old Soviet bloc countries and Western countries. Will that doctrine still apply in certain instances?
You correctly analyzed the usefulness, and I think most people in the world over the last 50 years, especially those who've been responsible for governing, and I can't speak for any of them, but there are plenty of books and speeches out there by our former presidents, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, will argue strenuously, and I think accurately generally, that nuclear balance did keep the peace, at least kept the world from entering into a World War III, which many of the leaders after World War II were afraid was going to happen. No nuclear exchange. That's something positive. Now, we've had a lot of problems, but no nuclear exchange and no World War III. But here's the difference. We are at a different time in the world. We are at a different time in mankind. Extremism, terrorism, intolerance. Too many countries now have access to or have not just the weapons, but the technology to build these weapons. The accountability of these weapons is now completely different than it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And as I said earlier, there can be only one outcome if we don't get control of this, because that means if we don't get control, the world will proliferate with these nuclear weapons, the technology to build them, and the ability to build them, and at some point something will happen. What we want to do is stop that from that occurrence.
Senator Hagel, we have to take a short break right now. More of our conversation with the former senator in a moment. As we pause, let me remind you that you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see the debate taking place there right now. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.